Welcome to Disciple Making for Everyone and this brief introductory video on the training intensives designed to train disciple makers and catalyze a sustainable disciple making movement in your city and region. The series of 3 intensives takes place over the course of 4 to 6 months, with each individual intensive taking place on one evening and most of the following day. At each intensive, participants will be introduced to the extraordinary disciple-making and church-planting movements that are currently underway both in our country and around the world. Inspired by what God is doing, we will unpack the principles and practices of disciple-making modeled by Jesus and the New Testament church that exploded from 120 disciples hanging around when Jesus ascended to estimates of around 6 million disciples, despite their marginalization and often intense persecution less than 300 years later. Because training and not learning is the goal, intensives are extremely practical and interactive. At each intensive, participants will learn and practice simple tools by which to both imitate Jesus' pattern of disciple making and to train others to do the same. Following each intensive, participants will be ready to partner up with each other, invite some of their friends, families, and neighbors to join them, and begin weekly gatherings that first train and then sustain disciple makers. Within the first few weeks, everyone gathering will gain the confidence and competence to gather and train disciples on their own in preparation for the new disciples of King Jesus that will be reached as Jesus' pattern of disciple making is integrated into the life of the existing band of disciples. Following the New Testament example, bands of disciple-making disciples meet from house to house as simple but faithful expressions of the church, even as they continue gathering for larger worship services and to coordinate their efforts in serving and reaching their city in the name of King Jesus. Training intensives are based on the same principles as the disciple-making movements they are designed to catalyze: simplicity, reproducibility, and faithfulness. What is trained in the intensives may be immediately reproduced week by week and generation to generation in subsequent bands of disciple makers. The same is true for the intensives themselves. The entire process is designed to equip and empower local practitioners to reproduce the intensive sequence as needed in their own communities, regions, and beyond. Here's a brief overview so you know what to expect. The 4 to 6 month training intensives window begins when a trainer or team of trainers facilitates the first training intensive. With the subsequent support of weekly coaching calls, local bands of disciple makers are initiated. After a couple weeks of praying and planning together, a coordinated local outreach also takes place in a manner similar to that which was first modeled and experienced during the training intensive. Following that successful outreach, we will begin planning and praying for the second intensive, which we will lead and facilitate together. At the second intensive, we will repeat the same process of training disciple makers, but will share the training responsibilities with your local team 50-50. Once again, every participant, both those who attended the first intensive and those who did not, will be prepared to activate the training and subsequent bands of disciple makers. And then following the second intensive, fewer coaching calls may be needed as new bands of disciple makers now have an existing local network of friends and leaders from which they can draw wisdom and encouragement. A second outreach is also coordinated before planning and preparation get underway for the third and final training intensive, which will be led and facilitated entirely by local leaders, with the initial leaders there only to observe, participate, debrief, and then look to the future with your team as partners in the ongoing mission of King Jesus to make disciples of every people from where we are to the ends of the earth.